Good afternoon and welcome to today's session for the FYN Virtual Learning Series. Alors bonjour et bienvenue aux séries d'apprentissage virtuel du réseau des jeunes fonctionnaires fédéraux. Ça fait assez longtemps que je suis le modérateur d'un segment pour la série d'apprentissage. Alors c'est mon plaisir d'être ici aujourd'hui. So it's my pleasure to be here moderating today's session. So I'm Joshua Frame. I'm the National Chair of the Federal Youth Network. And we have three amazing panelists with us today to talk about career basics and networking 101. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I'm joining you from is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. I'd also like to mention that we have participants joining us from across Canada, from coast to coast to coast to coast to coast. Actually, that maybe is too many coasts, but certainly there are a number of coasts across Canada. And the land on which you're joining us from may be in the National Capital Region, and maybe Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, it may be other territory. And so Marcella will put a link in the chat, which will allow you to check on which unceded territory you are living on from across Canada. So as we move through today's session, please share your comments in the chat space. And please put questions only in the Q&A. So we have a lot of attendees with us today, and this will allow us to moderate the questions in a more structured manner, but also it allows you to upvote the questions that you want to hear answered. So today we have three panelists joining us, and they will share their expertise and thoughts around today's topic. So let's start off by meeting them. So I'll give each of them an opportunity to give a brief introduction. And we will start with Martin Choquette. Alors, commencer avec Martin Choquette.
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Martin. I am a public servant like many of you. Unlike some of our panelists, I've only been around for 6 years. I am currently at the Department of Finance here in the NCR. As you will hear later on, I've bounced around a couple of different departments, but happy to be here today and looking forward to the session.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. All right, Alia, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Yep, so my name is Alia. I am with Transport Canada. I've been a federal public servant nearly 13 years now. And I'm excited to speak with everyone today and bring in sort of a lot of how I learned my way through networking in the big vortex that is the GOC. Comes from a lot of work with the Young Professionals Network, actually. So I started with one, and I'm very familiar with the Federal Youth Network because I served as co-chair for the NCR YPN. And I think a lot of that is what I'm going to share with you today as well. I'm a policy advisor by day, and I work on a number of other horizontal initiatives on the side of my desk, including efforts to support mental health for public servants, anti-racism, and one team government type of work to bring public servants together. So looking forward to chatting about that with you today. Thank you. I'm done speaking.
Awesome. Thanks, Alia. Okay, and finally, Octavia James. Alors, finalement, on a Octavia James. So if you'd like to give us your intro, thanks.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Octavia James, and I'm an analyst at Treasury Board Secretariat. I started in government at the ripe old age of 37. I've been here for 12 years. So I came in sort of as a mid-career through a program called the Management Trainee Program, which actually was a program that really asked you to network. You were coming into a town you've never lived in before, and you needed a network to sort of get by. I am currently a member of several networks, including the Federal Black Employee Caucus and our Black Employee Network within Treasury Board Secretariat. I am also a technical committee member for the Standard on Psychological Health and Safety, and that's for Canada. So I'm looking forward to this. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Octavia. Okay, alors On va commencer avec des questions d'introduction pour cette séance. Et puis, après cela, on va prendre des questions de nos participants. So we'll start off with some pre-planned questions, and we'll be switching between English and French for each question. So as the questions go along, we encourage you to pose questions in the Q&A in the language of your choice. As long as one of those choices is English or French. We may have some third language skills here, but I would suggest that we stick to those two official languages for now. Alors, si vous voulez avoir vos questions en anglais ou en français, on peut avoir les réponses dans la langue de votre choix. So please feel free to pose questions in whatever language you are comfortable with. So we'll start off with question number 1. So we will start with Martin. So how do you define a network? And what's the value of having a network?
So networks can be whatever you want them to be. And when I think of a network, I don't just have one, I have many. Some of them are obviously Government of Canada related and related specifically to the job that I do. And in other areas, they're more informal, right? So when we think of like friendships and stuff like that, that's a form of a network. So yeah, that to me is the basis. It's basically relationships between people, whatever form those relationships take, whether they be professional or personal, or kind of like a mix of the two. Yeah.
Absolutely. Alia, anything to add on the how you define a network and what the value of having a network is?
Yeah, for sure. So I think part of it is the network is also like a relationship that you're entering into, right? So you can know people in your circles, but if there isn't some kind of engagement or reciprocity, or even a way to communicate, then what is it if you have people, but what is the value going to be to you? So I think part of that is building the relationship, whether very small. It starts with one person. You join a team and you start talking to somebody, or you go to a coffee shop and you happen to start chatting with somebody. It's that first basis of that communication that then can turn into so many different things, depending on where you want to take that, the level of commitment that you want to bring to it, and interest, or indirectly where that could lead you elsewhere. So it's really creating community and building that kind of group is a network as well.
Absolutely. Octavia, so having joined government at a later stage in your career, you discussed having, kind of a network that was largely outside of the GC. So how do you sort of view, what is a network and what's the value of having that network?
Okay, I'm going to start off by saying that I think your network will change depending on the stage of your life and the stage of your career. And as we see a little bit more mobility going in and outside of the government, you might be here for some years and then maybe you'll go out. I've always seen the value in continuing the networks I built previous to government and continuing with the one that I have. One just story about networking, that sometimes it can save you. And literally, I had the experience of the management trainees were one of the first people to go through workforce adjustment, meaning our jobs were going to be lost. Well, that was the time when I decided I needed to network like crazy. I had 2 small kids, but I still needed to spend my days networking to make sure I could still have a job. So I think there are, it will change over time, and being flexible and allowing that to evolve is really important.
Absolutely. Moving on to the next question. So this one we'll do in French. Alors, on va commencer avec Martin. Alors, où devrais-je réseauter? So where should I be networking?
Réponse quand même assez simple. Partout, n'importe où ce que l'opportunité se présente. Je pense qu'on est choyé quand même au gouvernement du Canada d'avoir plusieurs réseaux à l'interne, dans une capacité plus ou moins officiels, si on veut. Mais à part de ça aussi, il y a des réseaux plutôt informels comme sur Twitter. Il y a des conversations à tous les jours qui se passent sur Twitter qui s'adonnent à être des réseaux plus informels. C'est pas quelque chose qui est préparé par le ministère ou l'organisation dans laquelle tu te retrouves, mais c'est un réseau tout aussi important. Puis, en tout cas, c'est juste pour dire qu'il y a des réseaux un petit peu partout. Puis vraiment, trouvez-les. Vous en retirez beaucoup. Ouais.
Oui, certainement. Je pense que chaque séance, chaque événement, chaque place où tu donnes des conseils, où tu as une interaction, c'est une opportunité de réseautage. Et je pense que tu as mentionné cela, et puis oui, c'est vraiment partout où tu peux faire le réseautage. Octavia, d'autres pensées sur où on peut réseauter?
I think you should network, first of all, where you're comfortable, okay, where you can. And also making sure that, your networks, you can network for the sake of it, but you're going to want to find ones that are supportive to you over your career. And I think that's, joining, as I did, both FBEC and the Black Employee Network in TBS, that was very much about, this network will provide support for a group of people. And, so it drew me in. I also think that you can, your networks, like I said, will change over time. And being comfortable with that and letting some go also may be something a decision you'll have to make at some point.
Absolutely. Alia, any other thoughts on where you network?
I think it's hard to discuss where you network without discussing the how. And I think bringing in sort of intentionality to your networking and the purpose you're looking for is a big part of that. And so that's going to directly relate to where you find these opportunities, right? Whether more local or smaller, and that has its benefits too in terms of a bit more deeper engagement and sort of the quality of what you're going to get versus a bit larger and broader depending on your reach. So I really think it's what is the purpose of your networking at this point? Is it to elevate your career and seek a job experience that you're looking for? Is it to just get to know people and find out, hey, who's who and who's doing what? Is it to gain awareness for an event or things going on and build, that sort of circle? So I think with the where you network is the purpose and what it's for or how.
Absolutely. Octavia, back to you.
I just had a thought. I mean, being a child of the 80s and, watching people network outside their high school door smoking and stuff like that, things that are very taboo now, but these little impromptu networks can be useful. And I used to have a colleague at Treasury Board who would go outside, he would get his glass of milk and go outside at the smoker door at TBS and just talk to people because he knew that was one place where they would share information. So sometimes it really is those informal places where you will find information that you really need.
Absolutely. Yes, that is a good thought. Alia, sorry, back to you.
Sorry, I just had to jump in on what Octavia was saying because it just reminded me of this Friends episode, if you watched Friends. And Rachel, one of the characters, is trying to get in with her boss, but her boss is a smoker and Rachel is not. And a lot of decisions and being in the in crowd involved going out and she had to pretend that she was a smoker. It didn't end very well, but the point is I'm just remembering that in that, maybe not necessarily, adopting a habit that you don't want to. And I think that brings truth to being your true self, but finding those people and meeting them where they are for that. So yeah, I'm done speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the idea is to be sort of authentic in terms of where you're networking. So If you want to engage on Twitter, do that, but don't do it when you hate Twitter and you hate spending any minute tweeting or sharing information that way. Maybe you want to be doing that on LinkedIn or on a different platform, or maybe you have a guise of becoming some sort of a TikTok star and engaging with people that way. Anything is possible, certainly in terms of the platform that you're using. And it's certainly all changing in terms of a virtual context when we don't have the same level of in-person interaction that we did before. And we may not for some time if we do again, really. Sorry, that was kind of depressing. So moving on to our next question. So who should be in my network? Octavia, we'll start with you.
Again, I speak of support, but also, and we talked a little bit about this when we had our sort of dry run for this, but for me, keeping in touch with those outside of government is important because of the kind of work I do. I can kind of only be useful if I'm looking beyond what the government is doing. And so that's where I use Twitter a lot to see what is going on. So the value of that one is pretty important. But again, it depends on what you're doing, I think. And I've seen a lot of folks use MS Teams now. I don't know how many of you have MS Teams. I know not everybody does, but are using that platform to engage, and they'll go to a talk and someone will say something and then they'll contact them later. And this is, again, and I see, we're going to, for those who are more introverted as well, it's a very useful way because you're writing, you're not having to call people up. And, and most of the time, people are happy to meet with you. I mean, honestly, at this stage in the game, when we are all kind of lonely, it can be very nice to have these call outs and say, hi, I was wondering. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a key point, and speaks to one of the questions that we had in the chat, which is if you have any advice for networking virtually during COVID. And I think that is a great way to do it is, hey, I heard this person speak. So Octavia, like we heard you speak at an event and we were like, we should connect with her. And in our case, we're doing it as our job. But in your case, as an individual, you can do it as, here are, people that are doing work that interests me, or they're involved in communities that interest me. And what's the worst case scenario of reaching out for a 15-minute coffee chat? They say no, or they don't respond. Who cares? But then you go to the next person. So it's really opened up all those doors where, everyone is working virtually. So, and people are willing to give up, some time to chat with you. Like I've done dozens of discussions since the start of COVID with random people who contacted me on LinkedIn and said, hey, can we have a half-hour chat? I just want to run some things past you or get your advice, or whatever the case may be. People are open to it. And if they're not, then they're not the kind of people you want to network with anyway. So
that's the other thing, is that if they're not interested, then you don't need to be either, and you don't need to worry. That's really, I think, an important piece.
Alia, who do you have in your network? Like, how do you decide who should be in your network?
This is an exercise that I go through regularly. So I think it's important to figure out what the value added is for you and what you're looking for. So in the social media context, for example, and I need to be better at this, but I do regularly check who I'm following, because I also don't want my feed to be clouded with stuff that isn't going to be useful to me, or is, people retweeting stuff that I already get from a main source, or whatever it is, because I want to get what I need out of these networks, and I want to be able to deliver to the people what they're looking for, or why they, for whatever reason they followed me, because I'm sharing something that resonates with them. And so I want to make sure that the accounts that I'm following and retweeting or resharing or reposting on Instagram is stuff that will be valuable. So part of it is what is the value to me, but also what is the value indirectly to community members? Because even if it's not something that I needed to hear, maybe somebody in my networks does. Maybe I know a lot of young professionals who are looking for a career networking event that's happening on March 16th. So maybe I'll retweet that one, even if personally, it's, not directly related to something that I need. So that's part of it. When I started my career, I think a lot of it was about how do I elevate my career? How do I get to the next point or get where I need to? And so those networking opportunities look very different than what they do today for me in terms of finding meaning and purpose in what I'm trying to do and how I'm trying to deliver. So as Octavia mentioned earlier, it will change. But for me, it's funny because I haven't really lost anyone, but I've changed my relationship with how I'm engaging with them and how they're engaging with me. And so for me, I brand myself as a community connector, right? A community builder. So I might be talking to somebody and I remember being at something a month ago, a year ago, whatever it was, and I heard about a project they're doing and they tell me that they're interested in this. And I say, hey, you should talk to this person, like they're working on this. And so that's part of the networking in that I don't engage directly for me, but I direct in a way that's going to make an impact or value to the rest of my network, including myself. I'm done speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see we have a lot of questions in the Q&A, which is awesome. So we will start off with a question from there. And we will start off with Martin. So la question est en français. Alors, c'est avez-vous des conseils de réseautage pour les introvertis? So in English, the question would be, do you have any advice for networking for introverts?
C'est une question qui nous est posée souvent, surtout pour les gens qui ont fait une carrière sur les réseaux. Puis, il n'y a pas de réponse simple. Je pense que ce qui est important pour les gens qui sont plus introvertis, c'est de connaître ses limites, savoir qu'est-ce qu'on est confortable de faire, qu'est-ce qu'on est confortable de partager, puis de savoir où est ma limite, où est-ce que j'en peux plus, puis pas nécessairement se retirer parce qu'on ne veut pas participer, mais vraiment juste connaître la limite puis dire, j'ai fait ce que je pouvais, ce que j'étais prêt à offrir. J'ai besoin d'un petit peu de temps, juste pour me reposer. C'est de la façon que je regarde la situation vraiment. Je suis un peu je suis introverti, mais extraverti en même temps. I'm one of those magical unicorns. C'est vraiment la leçon qui m'a été donnée tôt, que j'ai gardé le plus. C'est que tu donnes ce que tu peux, tu fais ce que tu veux. Puis quand tu te sens que tu as donné ce que tu voulais, que tu pouvais, puis que tu as besoin juste de prendre quelques minutes ou des jours, quoi que ce soit, pour faire une recharge, sens-toi pas mal, fais-le. Je pense que tout le monde a ses limites, c'est vraiment important de les connaître. Donc, pour les gens qui sont plus du côté introverti, c'est probablement la leçon que je vous donnerais. Juste, connais ta limite, prends le temps de participer autant que tu veux, mais aussi de recharger pour refaire le plein.
Oui, certainement. Des bons conseils pour les introvertis, mais pour tout le monde, parce qu'on est dans un monde où on a peut-être 8 ou 10 engagements virtuels par journée. Ça dépend de ton rôle, mais on a beaucoup d'engagements virtuels, beaucoup de réunions virtuelles et des fois, c'est un peu taxant sur tes limites d'attention et d'énergie. Alors, c'est important de prendre du temps pour toi-même. Next question. So going by the upvoting function in the Zoom Q&A, which is really cool. So how do you manage and maintain your established network over the years so that you don't pop up one day after 3 to 5 years of not talking to the person? And the person says they are looking for work and they need to network. So Tavia, maybe this would be a good question for you. So How do you kind of maintain that network? Especially you have a network that, you've been in government for 12 years. Before that, you were in the private sector or other areas. How do you kind of maintain those connections over time?
Okay, I think that there is a sense that those networks from my prior years have shrunk down, but that's okay. I've kept the key ones, and I think that's been important. And how did I do it? I think one thing to understand is like where my age was when I joined the public service. A lot of people I knew were with small children, and they might be out for 2 years. And I think you start to get a little bit more I don't know, just be at ease with that, with the fact that, a network, especially if it's a volunteer sort of thing, you will have periods where you're going to be more participative and where you're going to have to step back. And I think we shouldn't be too afraid of that, of reaching out after a time, because I think lives are busy. And I think that people understand that immensely. So from my theater days, I have folks that I still connect with in the theater world. From my health research days, I have a couple there, not many, but just a couple. And it's so also I can keep abreast of things. But yeah, you do have to sort of change it occasionally.
Absolutely. And Lin-Manuel Miranda wouldn't be in your theater days contact list, would he? Because
no,
that's definitely somebody I would like to network with.
I was in Toronto, but I was doing like postmodern feminist theater. So I don't know.
Okay.
Actually, yeah. Well, actually, I think he would enjoy it, but
But it's not Lin-Manuel Miranda. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Just wanted to clarify that.
Musicals.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's very important. Your connections may be more sporadic, but it's a matter of, there's a bit of a cull that happens. I think when people leave a department, when people leave a job. Martin, maybe you could speak to that in terms of, sorry, not to say that you've culled your network, but how have you sort of figured out like, okay, well, this was, a person who was really important to the job I was doing at the time. But when I leave, it may not be as important to keep contact with that person. How do you sort of make those sort of judgment calls, or do you kind of keep a larger network and have sort of more sort of peripheral communication with a larger group of people?
So I'm very much on the throw the network wide. That's the kind of network that I've crafted for myself, because I feel like in my work, that's what benefits me the most. That being said, you kind of alluded to it. Like I've changed departments. This is my third department now in 6 years. But within those individual departments, I've sometimes changed teams, right? Which means a whole new group of people, a whole new network. So to kind of get to the crux of your question, I don't really lose contact with anybody even after I've left the job. I like to keep in touch and say, like, pop in out of the blue and say, hey, how are things going? Last time we spoke, you were working on this. How's that? So it kind of keeps that information flow going, even though it might not necessarily be overly relevant to the work that I'm currently doing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not of value. If you talk to most of the people that I've worked with, what they'll tell you is Martin is a wealth of information, and like information that is not immediately relevant to the position that he occupies. But that for me is what makes networking so much fun. I like knowing about different things. I like knowing what's going on in other shops. And even though, again, it's not immediately relevant to what I do in my day-to-day job, I still find it important to keep those connections just to know what's going on and be informed, because otherwise I get really bored and I feel like I'm not really contributing anything, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Alia, the next question is for you. So this comes from the Q&A, and the question is, how would you go about an initial sort of cold call or contacting a potential new person or a new network or a new community?
Yeah, for sure. So back in the day, when cold calling was a thing, I did it, and I also did the email thing. And again, this comes down to what is your intent or your purpose behind what you're doing. So in my case, we'll use the example of trying to find a new job or a career, right? And so I told myself every day, like I would send out 5 emails I would go into GEDS. There was no GC Connects back then. So I would go into GEDS, send 5 emails a day, and that was like my goal. And, you know, it comes back to what you said, the worst somebody can say is not respond or say no. So I had nothing to lose. And so I would send it out, and, you know, eventually out of the, let's say 100-ish or whatever I send, maybe 10 people responded, right? Or whatever that number is, or for every 5, maybe 1 person responded. And that would be the next step, would be to initiate, you know, like a meetup or a coffee. And the thing is the way I'd frame it, I think also mattered. So similar to what Martin was saying about being open to it, because you never know how indirectly some of these connections can make it work for you. And you may not, you know, directly get to the career that you want, and you take a little bit of a detour, but you would be surprised at how much anything that you do has a way of coming back full circle, and how much transferability there is in your skill set. There are things that I did that I knew I didn't want to do as a career, but just having that experience helped me advance in my career into other areas that I wanted to do, with that experience being part of it, or part of what gave me, you know, a bit of an edge. So you can articulate this one of 2 ways, right? You can just be direct and to the point and say like, hey, maybe I've qualified in a pool somewhere. So maybe you're leveraging that and you're saying, I'm, you know, in this pool, I'm trying to find work that has to do with this. Do you have opportunities? And then the other way, which is a bit more broader, but can help frame the conversation, is, hey, I'm looking to make a change in my career and explore options. You know, the government has so many great things that we don't even know about or talk about. So I love hearing about the neat files that people are working on. I'd love to hear more about your shop. And so that, you know, isn't directly to the like, I want a job, but it's like, I want to know what's going on with you. And then, you know, when should I check back with you for opportunities or things like that? So I think there's those ways of doing it. Fast forward to, you know, the last few years, where using social media has been a great way to connect. Twitter DMs or Twitter posts just saying like, hey, looking for this. You'd be surprised how many public servants share that or help each other out, because we're a community, and I can't tell you the number of job like exchanges, or hey, this person's looking for a PM2 or whatever it is. Do you know any? And I get them all the time. I get them by email, I get them on social media. LinkedIn is another one that I think the government is trying to leverage more and be more active on. And of course, there's now the jobs marketplace. So even if you see a job that you don't think you may qualify for right away, you'll have that person's contact name, you'll have that manager. Talk to them and see how you can make your way to getting the skills or getting the experience that they're looking for. That's all part of networking too, right? It's not just a direct path to what you want, but it's sort of the indirect ways and skills that you'll actually build along the way that you don't realize will be very valuable to you later. So yeah, I'm done speaking.
Absolutely. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, and just to tack on to what Alia is saying, like, don't get discouraged if, you know, you have a conversation and you approach someone saying, you know, you're looking for this new opportunity and you're starting to build that network, and they don't have anything available to help you out initially. Some of the best connections that I've made through my networks are people that I started talking to 3 years ago. And then out of the blue, they were just like, hey, you have this great skill set. And, you know, I know we spoke a while ago, but I've been, you know, keeping tabs on you, paying attention. And then they're like, I may have an opportunity. Let's explore it. Let's discuss it. So yeah, just don't get discouraged if that initial setup of an informal network or something more formal doesn't necessarily, there's no payoff. It may not pay off immediately, but it eventually will if you keep working at it, and if you just kind of keep those, I guess, those lines of communication open and you're receptive to what may come down in the future.
Absolutely. Octavia.
Yeah, I was just going to, I wanted to add in terms of just volunteering yourself, because I think that sometimes, and I know from my own experience that through just volunteering myself to do something, things open up, good results happen. And in fact, something, and I'll just share with you, is that I volunteered to work with people who are trying to get midwifery regulated in Nova Scotia. At the end of the day, I was the chair of this group when it was regulated. I just volunteered. Often we think that people don't, that they have enough people to do work or whatever. They never do. So volunteering really can move things for you, and you never know what's going to come out of it. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very key point. Just about every organization that's volunteer run is needing people to help it at all times. And I've had the same experience of like people reaching out and saying, hey, can I help out with something? And there was a person we onboarded after about 3 days because we were like, absolutely, you are fantastic and we want to have you work with us right now. And we have no salary attached to it, you're a volunteer, but 100% we are on board. Alia, you had something to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it also helps to actually get more than one opinion as well, or speak to more than one person, because depending on who you, like, people have different ways of sharing advice, even in a mentoring networking capacity. And it can, one experience doesn't determine the rest of it. So I think Martin was talking about getting discouraged, which is what made me think of this is, I actually had an experience where I had qualified in a pool and I was reaching out, and one of the first people I reached out to was one of the managers from that group. And it was not a fun conversation because she basically told me I had no business even being considering that level because of my current, even though the level of the box that I was in didn't reflect my abilities. I had qualified in a pool that was, I think it was 3 levels above what I was, but I was doing the work, and I don't have to convince you guys of that. But the point is that's what she told me. And I had this moment of like, I was discouraged and I felt really demoralized, but that was one person, right? And I started talking to other people, and some of my mentors who really did encourage me and told me like, don't, like, that's just one person. So just my advice would be like, keep going. You're not always going to hit it on the first shot, but you never know who will see something in you, who may think of you, even if it's not for a job, but they have you on their radar for future, or they're talking to somebody else and they're like, hey, like Alia qualified in this thing, and if you're looking for that, like, you guys should talk. So that would be my one thing to add is don't let yourself get discouraged just because there's a few people out there who have different opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think unfortunately, Alia, I think your experience isn't necessarily unique. I had a similar sort of thing where I was qualified in a pool, and I just contacted the hiring manager for an area to say, hey, like, are there opportunities for you to staff me from this pool, and or can I talk to you about sort of what your area does? And they were like, why are you contacting me? Like, no, I don't want to talk to you, and I don't want to tell you what our environment's about. And surprise, surprise, like, their area actually had a lot of trouble retaining staff. So definitely, yeah, get multiple people that you can reach out to. And I think Martin, that speaks to your, cast a wide net. And then there are different people you can reach out to when you're seeking advice and guidance. So the next question from the Q&A. So I hear so much about networking, but I'm very conscious of taking other people's time. How do I balance networking with my work while also taking into account the other person's work that I may be taking away from them? I think I'm taking them away from. En français, la question c'est par rapport au réseautage et d'avoir une balance d'être conscient de le temps que la personne dépense au réseautage, le temps que tu demandes d'une personne quand tu réseautes avec eux. So who would like to answer this question?
I can take it for starters, and then Octavia, I guess. Yeah, I think when you're clear from the beginning, you know, as Octavia said, and I think Martin also said, you have nothing to lose by starting. And I think this is where the intentional part of networking comes in that I was speaking to, is be very clear about why you want to meet, what you want to get out of that meeting, right? So something along the lines of, again, I use the pool example because that's the quickest one for me, but relate it to any work you're doing, right? Like I'm working on, you know, this engagement strategy, or I've qualified in this pool, and I was referred to you by so-and-so. If you were wondering if you have a few minutes to, you know, discuss this a little bit more over coffee. Specifically, I'm looking to do A, B, C. Whatever it is, right? And discuss, you know, potential opportunities. Like you're already giving them a sense of who you are, what you're looking to do. And that not only it maximizes their time, it also helps them better prepare for you and how to give you what you're looking for, rather than it being very loosey-goosey in that way. So I'm done speaking.
Octavia, over to you.
Right. So TBS, where I work, Treasury Board Secretariat, there are a lot of what we would call, if you have ever seen Discovery Insights, they are the blue people. They are the quiet, they are the introverted. You do worry sometimes about taking people's time, especially when they're like that. But one thing I've noticed is that as long as you're checking in, you know, just in like any active listening exercise where you say, is this okay? Am I taking too much of your time? Shall we do this another time? Those kind of things, I mean, they're always appreciated, I think. And knowing when, you know, in my organization, knowing that there are so many people who are introverted, who don't necessarily are going to come out and say, I'm open to this. You know, it's been a learning experience for me to just go ahead and ask. Because again, you know, everybody's in charge of their own time. And here I'm going to add something about the question about networking with regards to balancing it with your work. The networking you're doing is probably helping your employer. Okay, I definitely know where I am right now, where I live in the middle of a data shop, that the work I do to connect with others is going to help us. So I think you also need to frame for your manager that the work you're doing in networking is part of the job in a certain sense. And I can even bring it back to that management trainee program, the federally wide one that was around for about 20 years, where they had a whole portion that was about networking because it was such a key to a career in the public service. So I really think that that's, you know, it's not just outside of your job, it is part of your job. And framing it that way for your employer might be helpful.
Absolutely. And Jen added in the chat, and I think it's a very important point to Google what you can about the person and their organization before you're trying to network with them. I know I get a lot of messages saying like, can I find out more about your organization? And then I'll say, well, look at my LinkedIn profile. It links to, you know, our social media channels. From there, you can see, you know, the like 50 videos of our last events. You can see our annual report. You can find out any of those things. And then if you have questions kind of after that, after the Google search, after the research, then it's a matter of, you know, reaching out and saying, you know, hey, your organization seems really cool. I see you do a lot of virtual events. Here's what I, you know, have in terms of, you know, questions or advice, and sort of be clear about, you know, are you looking for a response by email? Are you looking to set up a chat? Are you flexible in terms of like how you get that interaction? Because somebody might not have, you know, half an hour in their day. Like if you're reaching out to a deputy minister and saying, you know, can we set up a 30-minute, you know, mentoring session? They might say, absolutely, we can set that up in like 2024. But if you're reaching out to, you know, the average person, they might say, well, like we could set up something in a week or a couple weeks, but, you know, do you have any questions that I can address sort of more immediately? So definitely be clear on what you're asking for and why you're contacting that person. I know I've complained about this on a few occasions, but the most problematic emails I get are the ones that have gone out to like every manager across a department or across the government of Canada saying, here's my CV, hire me. And I specifically am generally not hiring people because we don't have much of a budget. But I'll respond back and say, well, here's track changes on your CV and cover letter that you might want to incorporate in terms of, sort of your next application, and sort of be clear on like what it is you're seeking in terms of role. But do things that will lead to positive outcomes for sure. So the next question we have in the Q&A, can you give some examples of how you obtained new professional opportunities through networking? Est-ce que vous avez des exemples de comment vous avez obtenu des nouveaux opportunités professionnelles par réseauter? So Martin, maybe we'll start with you on this one.
Sure. So where do you want me to begin? So to give everybody a little bit of background, I came into the public service 6 years ago as a student through the FSWEP program. My first experience, like many, I knew it wasn't what I wanted to be my career for the rest of the time that I would be with the government of Canada. So there was a department switch involved where I ended up at Public Services and Procurement Canada, and I was actually the student project coordinator for their Young Professionals Network at PSPC. So shout out to Vanguard if anyone's listening. And through that, I got to meet everybody you can imagine within the department: senior management, middle management, supervisors. And through that experience within PSPC, that's when I also started widening my network outside of my home department. That's when I started tuning into what was going on Twitter and seeing those conversations that are happening there, and making connections with people. So I've had a number of opportunities that have been presented to me that have come forward because of those networks that I was able to build through that experience at PSPC. At certain times, I was a communications officer, even though I started as a project coordinator. I ended up being a change management lead on a pretty major project over at PSPC for a time. And then I decided at one point that, it was time to get back to my roots. My background is in communications. That's what I studied in university. And I knew that I needed a department switch at the same time. I'd been at PSPC for about 3.5 years at that point. And I'd gone around and I felt, I need a breath of fresh air. I need to see what else is out there, what it's like being in another department. So thankfully, one of the connections that I had made while I was on the network at PSPC back in that first job was now a DG over at SSC. And I had tweeted something out at one point saying, how frustrated I was with the application process for government jobs, because as we all know, applying for jobs in government, especially on open competitions, is not necessarily a pleasant experience. So they actually sent me a direct message and they said, hey, are you looking for a new opportunity? Like, what's the deal? And sure enough, I responded and I said, yeah, I'm never not looking for new opportunities. And so to kind of go back to a point that I made on an earlier discussion, this is someone that I had met, that I had kind of built, a relationship with as part of my network earlier on in my career. And there wasn't an immediate payoff to that connection. But years down the road, that opportunity came up. And so I obviously jumped in head first and said, yeah, let's meet, let's talk, let's figure it out. So that's how I ended up joining Shared Services. And then even now, most recently, I was at Shared Services for a little over a year, almost a year and a half, at which point, the pandemic happened. And in the crunch to get information out there on social media, I built connections with more social media practitioners across the government of Canada. And then at one point, someone from another department reached out and said, hey, I'm looking to staff a position on my team. We've chatted in the past a little bit. Would you be interested in at least talking about it? And that's how I ended up at Finance Canada. So every opportunity I've had in my career, there's obviously kind of like a starting point, but everywhere I've ended up has been because of the networks that I've built, both formal and informal, sustained, and then not as sustained, where I kind of I don't necessarily communicate like every day with those people, but I know that they're there. I know that they're interested, and I can reach out to them, or they'll reach out to me if they have an opportunity. So yeah, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I've had many, many opportunities presented because of the networks that I've built.
Yeah, absolutely. Octavia or Alia, anything to add on that question around how obtaining new opportunities through networking?
Sure, I can add. I haven't done a competition since 2012, and that's because of the work I do and the networking. I've been seconded twice to other areas, and I've just being happy at the level I am. I've just done a whole bunch of different positions because people heard about me or knew the work I did. So your work is actually, and this is something too, I think also for folks asking about introversion, sometimes it doesn't matter if you're introvert or extrovert, or your work will show who you are. And in the latest experience of this, after the murder of George Floyd, there started to be a lot more discussion on Twitter about racism. And because I had a background in critical race theory, I went into this discussion. And from out of that, I started working with the school on stuff, Canada School. So there's just ways that, I think that, it really does help. And I am not a fan of competition because I like the idea that people know who I am and what I do ahead of time. But I have to get to do that again at some point, those competitions, but that's later. Thank you for not asking me to be on a panel on resume writing, because that's just not my one.
Absolutely. I'll get to the next question we have. So this is from a casual employee. So the question is, any advice for a casual government employee looking to secure more permanent employment in the government, and how networking can assist in terms of that? Alia, maybe we'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, depending on your circumstances and the length of your contract and things like that, I would say get out there, like get talking to people and keep that list with you and just plant the seed, right? You may not get something directly, but you say like, I want to be on your radar, or I want you to let me know when there are these opportunities coming up. And when should I follow up with you, right? So the neat thing now is because GC Collab didn't exist once upon a time, and now that it does, if you have an account or create an account while you're here, you can still use it after to continue to stay in touch with those people. And you can establish sort of an informal sort of social contract where you're saying like, can I check back with you every however long it is, or back in 3 months, or can we meet up for a coffee, or maybe set up a mentoring opportunity? Whatever you can do in an informal way keeps you sort of in touch with what's going on. Again, social media, if you're following the accounts of either the people you want to work for or their organizations, you'll also be aware of what's going on. It's not uncommon knowledge right now that public health is, because of what's going on in the world, there are many opportunities there. If that's something of interest to you and you're seeing that on your radar, or you're seeing those opportunities pop up, get in touch with those people and say, when would be a good time, especially because they're trying to do the work in such a way that nobody burns out. So there is opportunity for rotating assignments or short-term contracts or whatever it is. So I would definitely say that just get out there. Again, you have nothing to lose. Get the names of those people you want to stay in touch with and establish what kind of engagement you're going to have with them, so that they get the heads up or aren't, kind of caught off guard when you do reach out to them even after your contract ends. I'm done speaking.
Yeah, Absolutely. Martin, over to you.
I'm just going to piggyback again on what Alia is saying, and like to one of her points, don't put yourself in a box. Like obviously let your work speak for itself and build those networks across the government of Canada. But like never in a million years did I imagine that I would be working for the Department of Finance. I am not a finance person. If you ask me anything about the economy, like I know the basics, but it's not about what the department is doing. For some people, like obviously that is a huge driver, and I encourage everybody to find an organization where the mandate of that organization speaks to them. I think that makes your work and your experience there that much better. But don't close yourself off to working or talking to people or reaching out to people in different organizations just because it's not what you had envisioned. Like outside of the GC, like even before I was a public servant, I never even thought of, like, I didn't want to be a public servant. Like many of us who grow up in the NCR, my parents are both public servants. I heard all the horror stories. It was not the career, the exciting career that I wanted for myself. But then, reality sets in. I took a leap of faith, and I've been doing that ever since. I've taken new opportunities in areas that at initial face value aren't something that I would have thought of, but they've also been the most enriching experiences of my career so far. So definitely don't put yourself in a box. Do everything you can to break out of that box and get those new experiences, because they're absolutely everywhere.
Absolutely. So we have a question in the chat, which I'll just address quickly. I see we're getting to the end of our time here. Mais les questions étaient en français par rapport au réseautage hors du région du capital national, alors de faire le réseautage dans les régions. Et je dirais qu'une des opportunités, c'est d'avoir les connexions avec les réseaux régionaux. Alors pour le réseau des jeunes fonctionnaires fédéraux, on a certainement des réseaux dans chaque province. Alors, pour la région du Québec, on a le réseau des jeunes fonctionnaires fédéraux de Québec, LJFFQ. Et puis, il y a d'autres réseaux, réseaux des gestionnaires et d'autres réseaux dans les régions aussi. Alors, c'est peut-être une opportunité de connecter avec ces réseaux régionaux pour commencer votre comme parcours de réseautage régional. Mais aussi, les réseaux régionaux et de faire le réseautage régional, c'est peut-être moins important que c'est maintenant. So I would say that, keeping your connections to your region are less important than they were a year ago. I know I spent about 2/3 of my career working out of the Ontario region, and the opportunities are really opening up. Alors, je pense que maintenant, on a des opportunités de travailler pour une fonction qui n'est pas dans la région qu'on est situé. So we can work for jobs that are wherever in this environment, and we're seeing that on job posters as well. So definitely great opportunities for you to build your network. I think each of our three panelists today gave some great examples. I wish we had 2 hours for this discussion because we still have 13 open questions. I think we abandoned our pre-planned questions at question 3. But a huge thanks to Martin, to Alia, and to Octavia for joining us today. Merci à nos panélistes pour partager leurs conseils, partager leurs pensées, leur expérience pour cet sujet sur le réseautage et comment on peut avancer nos carrières avec le réseautage. So thanks very much for joining us for the final of the Career Basics themed month of March. So huge thanks, Martin, Alia, and Octavia. So what's next in terms of our programming? I will say quickly, our next session is on March 23rd. And on March 23rd, it will be the 1-year anniversary of the Federal Youth Network Virtual Learning Series. So we're going to be doing a retrospective of how we launched the Virtual Learning Series and how we sort of created innovation and allowed this series to sort of thrive in the time of the pandemic. So we're going to take a real kind of deep dive into, what went right, what went wrong, and how can you innovate in your careers? How can you take some of the lessons learned and, come up with new ideas and launch new programming across the government of Canada? Alors, ça va être le 23 mars. Et puis, après ça, on va commencer le nouveau année fiscale. So after that, we will start the new fiscal year with looking at the future of work, which looks very different than it did a year ago today. So thanks everyone for joining us. Merci de nous joindre. Et puis, we will hopefully see you shortly. And for any colleagues that you have who missed today's session and want to check it out, it will soon be on our YouTube channel, which Marcella will add in the chat and is linked from the FYN Wiki page. So thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day and stay safe. Merci à tous.
I just want to mention about the Friday networking, One Team Gov, Josh.
Yes. Yes. So as Marcella pointed to, so on Friday, there will be a networking session for One Team Gov. And Marcella, I think you've put the link in the chat to that. So that's Friday at 4 p.m. for a follow-up with that networking session. And One Team Gov is a great example of a grassroots community. Alia's involved in it, Marcella's involved in it, and they've done excellent programming over the last year to keep people engaged. And if you're new to networking, this is a great network to connect with and start that journey. So thanks very much, everyone, and we will see you soon.